a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Yes, it's Super Cal al Rescate. For those of you that don't recognize that, you need to watch Cow and Chicken. Some folks are content to drink hot black water because they don't know any better. I prefer to drink the best coffee in the universe because my taste buds are my best buds. Julio roasts the beans right there in the back room, and you get only great tasting coffee with none of the chemicals other companies use. Swing by 4501 McPherson and see if I know my coffee. If it's too far to drive, go to organicmancoffeetrike.shop and see how real good coffee tastes. I must thank James for the TARDIS coffee cup and the Frankenstein book. I don't want to use the cup right now, seeing as I do break things. I've gone through a number of coffee cups simply because that's how I am. We're trying to set up a guest event during the Fall Festival in Houston, Georgia. It's only 1,200 miles from where I am right now. Don't know exactly how we're going to arrange to get there. I said I would be willing to drive, and he said no, they're going to buy me a plane ticket, which, well, still, the airport is 150 miles from the town, I believe. It's next to Atlanta. Well, we're trying to get this thing set up for the Fall Festival, which is to begin, I believe, in September and run into October. Kind of a Halloween thing. He wants me to come there and say a few things about strange things. I don't know exactly what the event is going to look like because we're still setting it up. But if you would be kind of interested in maybe showing up, like I said, it's near Atlanta, let me know and we'll try to get a unofficial head count so we know if we need to have it in somebody's garage or maybe actually in a bigger building. Let me know. Dave, the guy that sent me the Art Bell coffee cup, the other coffee cup I'm afraid to use, he also sent me this coffee sign right behind my head, right there. Uh, he had said something about maybe doing a show about people who sign things without actually reading or knowing what it is they signed. Oh, by the way, this is my Art Bell coffee cup that I managed to break several of. That's what's left of it. That's why I don't like using glass cups. This is steel. Hopefully, I won't break it. Getting back to Dave, uh, he asked if I'd ever do a show or I'd be interested in doing a show about paperwork, basically. I hate paperwork. I worked for the government for years, and we used to do a lot of paperwork. One leader, we called him A Chiefs, he came by to give us a little pep talk one day at the station, and he said the most important thing we did in our jobs was paperwork. And I told him I thought our most important thing was to catch people trying to sneak into the country. Well, I did have a reputation for telling people exactly what I thought, even when they didn't want to hear it. But like I said, I hate paperwork. One year, the boys up in Washington came out with a reduction of paperwork bill. So the Border Patrol added two new forms to the already overstuffed A file. Any alien not from Mexico was considered to be an OTM, other than Mexican. That was an official term. Back in the bad old days, we had a form called the 221S. Oh, I just heard a bunch of Border Patrol agents screaming when I said that. It was what nightmares were made of. You had to fill out the front, which was a task all in itself. You had to type out the charges, in that you entered the United States without inspection as per, plus a bunch of charges. It had to be in English and in Spanish, all squeezed into a tiny little area. To add the impossibility to this task, you had to spell out the date. You couldn't just write 1999. It had to be spelled out in both English and Spanish. Why? We don't know. We asked the guys up in the region if this was necessary, and he said no. And then our chief came out and said, "Don't pay any attention to what that guy said. You're going to spell it out, 'cause I said so." Then the fun would begin. This form was 3 pages with carbon paper in between. All the pages, no, wait, I think it was 4 pages with 3 pages of carbon paper. You had to remove all the pages. You had to carefully tear them all loose, turn them over, making sure that the carbon paper was the right side down, put them all back together in the correct order, and then type the back side of this form. There were a bunch of little tiny squares that you had to put big black X's in. The odds of your screwing this up were about 100 to 1 against. What really got to us was some sectors were allowed to handwrite these forms. Ours had to be letter perfect, and everything was typed out as if we were a bunch of clerks. There was lots of screaming and swearing as people would get almost finished only to mess up at the last second. Once you redid the form a few times, the alien had to sign it in several places. Oh, we had lots of customers who couldn't write. We had some who could at least sign their names, kind of. It looked more like a squiggly line. It looked like my signature. We caught this woman one night who had 6 kids with her, all under 10 years. Each kid had a different father, and therefore a different last name. She just may have been a woman of negotiable affections back in her hometown. 6 kids, 6 different last names. 4 of us worked on these files all night. At long last, it was time for the mother to sign everything. I still have nightmares about that event. We showed her what the name of each child looked like, and we told her that she needed to sign all of these forms with that name. She couldn't just sign it as their mother. I don't know why. Once again, it was one of those guys in the rear with the gear making decisions. Well, she kind of screwed up every signature. No two looked alike. It almost looked as if two separate people, well, it looked more like a dozen separate people, had been signing all of these forms. Close was not good enough for the folks who were going to sign off on our paperwork. We wound up redoing every form several times before we finally got that woman processed, her and her brood. Then there was a bunch of travelers. Any of y'all know what a travelers were or are? Most folks refer to them as gypsies. Nick, one of our senior agents, he had been a cop up in Washington State before joining the patrol. He knew who these folks were as soon as he talked to them. These folks smoked an entire carton of cigarettes while we were processing them. This was back in the good old days when you could smoke inside the processing room, which helped a lot for those of us having issues. Nick said that these people would climb a tree to tell a lie rather than stand on the ground and tell the truth. He was not exaggerating. They would change their names halfway through processing. They claimed to be born in several different countries. They changed their ages and their home addresses. We did have their driver's licenses, lots of driver's licenses. We had 4 people in custody, and we had about 12 driver's licenses, each with a different name, a different age, a different address, same pictures. We contacted Illinois to see which of these documents was legitimate, and we were told they were all good driver's licenses. Right. After processing all night long, we had 0 forms filled out. Nothing was signed. The A file was empty. All that we had was a bunch of blank forms and 4 people in custody. We finally managed to get the supervisor to talk to the A chief, who talked to the detention center, who said they would take these people into custody and they would process. The next day, these people were all kicked loose because at the time, in order to deport anyone, there had to be a country willing to take them, and nobody was accepting gypsies at the time. What does this have to do with signing things? On many occasions, aliens would sign the forms without the slightest idea of what they were signing. Hundreds of thousands of forms were generated only to be shredded after a few years. There was no way of knowing who was lying, who had been arrested 100 times. There was no lasting record because it was a bunch of typed out forms piled up in a back room somewhere. Nobody went through and said, this guy's been arrested several times, because there was no way of knowing. We did have to sign a form stating that the alien knew what they were signing. We would explain to them what they were signing and why. It was like telling a dog to stop barking at a squirrel. They didn't know what it was we were telling them just because. One day, some political person, I'll call her Janet, came down from Washington, and she was surprised to discover that we were still using typewriters and carbon paper instead of computers. All those forms being sent to the front office, and nobody ever seemed to notice they were typed and not printed. After a few weeks, we began getting computers. Those great big chunky beasts with floppy disks on the front. What's that, you say? You don't know what a floppy disk is? It was a means of saving your work. You could store maybe 10 forms on each disk, one photograph. A floppy disk was a kind of a storage device made of a thin, flexible coated piece of material with a magnetic storage medium on it. It was enclosed in a square, well, it was almost square, plastic cover, and it was floppy. It would, you could hold it up and it would bounce up and down. Eventually, we did get the 3.5-inch discs. Things were slowly improving. As the folks in Washington were getting thousands of laptops and color monitors, we were still using the black and white beasts. Rule number one when working with anyone: never ever leave your computer unattended, and never trust your best friend to keep an eye on it while you're gone. One of our agents, I'll call him Ron, left his computer running while he wandered off. He'd been doing his pay sheets, and I guess he had to go to the bathroom or something. So he just said, "Hey, would you keep an eye on my..." And he left the room. As soon as he was out the door, his best friend went over and started changing things on his pay sheet. He didn't add anything. He didn't give the guy 1,000,000 hours in a week. He didn't subtract anything. He changed his name. He changed it to Ronaldo Grapes, which kind of looked like his name. It did start with an R and a G, but he sure the heck wasn't named Ronaldo Grapes. Well, Ron never caught it. He filled out his pay sheet and his work forms, and he would send them in. His supervisor never caught it. His supervisor would sign off on his pay sheet and forward it. This went on for months. Oh, they were not electronically forwarded to Washington. No, we had to print them and then send them forward in the mail. Even though we had computers, the forms were paper. One day, Yolanda was sending off a whole bunch of paperwork, and she noticed there was a name that she didn't recognize. She asked somebody, "Who the heck is Ronaldo Grapes?" There weren't that many of us, and we kind of knew each other. Quick run through the list of suspects, and it's like, well, that's got to be this other agent. Ron had been sending in his paperwork with the wrong name on it for months. All those above him in the food chain had signed off on his pay sheet without ever actually reading it, and nobody ever caught on. In the movie The Phantom of Paradise, Winslow Leach, played by William Finley, is going to sign a contract with Swan, who is a minion of the devil, played by Paul Williams. Swan pokes Winslow's finger with a pen, saying he prefers it be signed in blood. There's a lot of legend and myth revolving around signing away your soul using blood. A blood magic, as the name suggests, involves the use of blood as a powerful source of magic energy. Blood is considered one of the most potent substances in magical practices because it symbolizes life, vitality, and the very essence of being. This type of magic is often associated with ancient primal rituals, tapping into the deep connection between life force and the mystical arts. Yeah, I had to read that off of a website somewhere because I didn't know exactly how to put that into English. Blood magic has its roots in a lot of cultures, ancient cultures and civilizations. The Aztecs to the Egyptians. The blood rituals were performed for all kinds of purposes, healing, protection, communicating with the gods. In some traditions, blood was believed to be a sacred link between humans and the gods. It was kind of a bridge between our world and theirs. Blood magic also appears in various myths and legends. In Europe, folklore, witches were often depicted using blood to cast spells and create powerful potions. In Africa and the Caribbean, blood is used in rituals to communicate with ancestors and spirits, seeking their guidance and blessing. The symbols are drawn with the blood to create protective barriers against negative energies and malevolent spirits. These sigils were often placed on doorways, windows, personal belongings, anything you wanted to protect. Sacrificial blood offerings made to deities or spirits in exchange for guidance or insight. This practice was often performed during significant rituals and ceremonies and on specific days of the year. The concept of signing contracts in blood is rooted in historical, cultural, and ethnic context. No, I did not stutter. ethnic. I started to laugh. My cat is entertaining me while I'm trying to talk. Blood oaths have long been associated with commitments and trust, often invoking the gods as witness. In ancient Rome, blood oaths strengthened one's commitment in an agreement. Indigenous cultures performed blood brother ceremonies. Mixing blood is a sign of kinship and loyalty. Medieval Europe saw knights who swore blood oaths to their lords, promising loyalty and service with dire consequences should they not uphold their agreement. Modern rituals, such as those practiced by contemporary groups, sometimes still engage in blood oaths for significant commitments. These practices highlight the profound significance attributed to blood, representing life, sacrifice, and fidelity. The modern legal context raises questions about the feasibility and practicality of requiring blood signatures. The need for a reliable method to verify the authenticity of a blood signature would arise. This is provided the devil has a lawyer. Well, come to think of it, I think he has all of them. That's just my idea. Uh, Enforcement issues. How are you going to get a person to give you their blood so that they can sign something? Uh, the ethical implications of requiring blood signatures are many and bizarre. Uh, who's going to give the blood? Where are you going to get the blood from? Are you going to give the person proper medical treatment once they've bled for you to sign the paper? Uh, Actually, when a lot of people are signing these documents, they're not signing it. They prick their finger and they put their finger on the paper, and that's considered their signature. Good enough for government work. Like I said, I wonder how this is going to affect the devil. I've referred to the Juicy Fruits a few times in the past. They are the musical group that sing most of Swan's songs. Their style changes as the wind blows. I've actually got the album, well, the CD, from the movie The Phantom of the Paradise, and I kind of like some of the Juicy Fruits music. It has an acquired taste. What's that one song? I listen to it all the time. Upholstery. If you've never heard it by the Juicy Fruits, it's kind of a 60s car culture humorous song. A swan song is actually a final act. It's performed just before whoever sings it is either about to die or retire. The phrase swan song originates from an ancient belief that swans would sing a beautiful song just before they passed away. This idea was first started by the ancient Greeks back in the 3rd century BC, and it's been referenced in Greek mythology ever since. Swans were considered sacred to Apollo, and they symbolized harmony and beauty. The legend appears in literature and even in Aesop's fable about the swan and the goose. You don't always have to sign in blood. Sometimes you don't even have to sign. The pact can be either oral or written. An oral pact may be made by means of invocations, conjurations, or rituals in order to attract a demon. Once the conjurer figures that the demon is present, they will ask for whatever their sought for dream, whatever it is that they want, in exchange for something that they don't think they need, their soul. No evidence is left behind of this pact. No signed document, no name scribbled out in blood, no fingerprint on a form. Well, according to some folks who are conducting the witch trials, an oral pact would actually leave evidence in the form of the witch's mark, an indelible smudge somewhere on the person's body that was caused when the devil touched them. The mark could be used as proof of this pact with the devil. It was also believed that the spot where the devil touched them would be, it wouldn't feel pain. In order to find out if a witch's mark was a witch's mark, the inquisitors would poke that spot with a sharp object, like a big needle, causing the person some pain. If they didn't say, hey, stop stabbing me with that needle, well, that was proof that the person was a witch. Some folks believe the person selling their soul has to sign in blood, while others say no, the contract can be scribbled out in blood completely. Whose blood? It was never really agreed upon. Some people said the person doing the selling had to use their own blood or a direct relative, such as one of their kids. Others said that an animal's blood would do nicely. There are those who believe blood is blood no matter where it comes from. I heard the gang of nerds, aka the Paranormal Rundown, talking about whether or not you could accidentally sell your soul. I'm pretty sure Vic Hermanson and Dave Griffith and maybe Father Mike were discussing this amongst themselves. I don't think JJ was in on it, but he might have been. It's been a while since I listened. Say you're going to put a new app on your phone or your computer. And as you're about to purchase or receive this app, a little window pops up that says you must agree to the terms and conditions. The T&Cs are the rules and agreements that govern the relationship between a business and their customers. It outlines rights, responsibilities, and legal protection. There's a long, long bunch of words that say anything from you cannot use their product for any kind of criminal activity, right down to you agreeing to sell your firstborn to the company. How do you know it doesn't say that? How many of y'all actually read that agreement before clicking in that little box, which in all intents and purposes is your signature? I know my wife reads those agreements. She is very careful about what she agrees to. How she married me, I have no idea. But she said yes, and well, I've got her signature on a piece of paper, and she's got my signature on that same piece of paper. Hardly anybody reads these things. It's too long, and people assume, you know what that means. They assume the company is legitimate and will not trick them into anything dangerous, risky, unethical, or too costly. In August 2009, H.R. 4885 was passed by both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and then it was signed by the President. It was supposed to be a bill to help improve our highway system. Well, Representative Dennison inserted some words into the bill that said that he, and he alone, was legally allowed to use marijuana anytime and anywhere for any reason. He is now the only American citizen legally allowed to use marijuana for any purpose, recreational or medical, anywhere within the United States. Those folks in Washington never bother to read the things that they sign, knowing that no matter what kind of a new law they enact, they don't have to obey it. It's for us to worry about. When Prohibition was signed into law, the people in Washington made sure to word it just right, just such a way that they themselves had an enormous loophole. It was illegal to manufacture, buy, sell, trade, or transport alcohol, but you could own all you wanted. The folks making it illegal for anybody in the United States to drink alcohol had laid in huge stockpiles, knowing that the law would someday be repealed. They were looking at the world through a bottom of a glass, while the rest of the United States was looking for something to drink. Do you remember that one woman saying, we have to sign the bill to find out what's in the bill? That is one of the dumbest and most dangerous ideas that was supported by the folks who are supposed to be taking care of our country. For all we know, they could have been signing a document saying that they were selling the United States to another country. They wouldn't know. They never bothered to read it. They just voted on it and signed it into law. Signing any kind of a contract or bill without knowing what is in it, it could land you in a lot of hot water. We are told things are in the bill that aren't in there, and that things are not in these bills when they actually are. The wording is so convoluted, even if you did read the bill, you probably wouldn't understand it. As for signing away your soul, I think not. I hope not. To me, signing away your soul is kind of like an alcoholic having a relapse. The relapse happens before the drink is poured. The saying goes, it's hard to have a slip if you stay out of slippery places. I know a lot of people who like to play around with the staying sober. They would go to nightclubs to listen to the music and drink soda and water. No booze. Uh, this was almost always a short trip into their next drink. I knew a guy who convinced himself that he could drink and then quit again. He talked about how nice it was that he could rely on those still sober to be there when he fell. It was about a week later I saw him carrying a 12 pack out to his car. I don't think he ever went back. He'd set himself up and then he dove headfirst into his fall. When somebody sets out to sell their soul to the devil, I doubt anyone or anything can stop them. They have wants that far exceeds of their needs. We need food and shelter, water, things like that. They want fame and fortune. I've lived a long time without fame or fortune, and it hasn't caused me any physical problems. I'd really love to have some of that fortune, and I don't think it would cause me any difficulties, but right now I am not willing to sell part of my future for fame and fortune. How many of you out there remember the Columbia House scam? You could buy 12 8-track tapes or VHS tapes for a penny. You only had to buy an additional 5 tapes over the next year or so. Sometimes it was 3 additional tapes, and sometimes it was 10. The contracts were constantly changing. We should have seen the red flags while making that initial purchase. You would find maybe 7 or 8 tapes that you really liked. And then you'd sit there scratching your head trying to figure out what other tapes did you want to buy to fulfill that dozen. People would ask each other, hey, is there a tape here that you'd like to have? You'd sit there and stare at the last 5 or so tapes and you just couldn't find any that you actually cared for. I know several people asked me, and I asked several other people. It was like Christmas, the day that that great big box arrived in the mail, and you could pull out a tape and either watch it or listen to it. Those of you not familiar with 8 tracks and VHS tapes, all I can say is look them up on the internet. They were clunky. It took a while to discover that the quality of these tapes wasn't all that good. Columbia House was recording their own tapes and then selling them. Never mind about that copyright violation thing. Somehow they got around it. About a week after Christmas, you'd get a video or a tape in the mail. Something that you didn't want, something that you wouldn't listen to or watch if it was the only thing available. And they wanted you to pay $20 for it. There's a lot of things that I don't watch or listen to. It's just not my thing. Well, it never failed. Any tape, any video, anything to listen to that arrived in the mail, it was always a real stinker. Something beyond my ability to stomach. Now you have a choice. You either return the tape to Columbia House at your own expense, or you pay for a tape you don't want. The funny thing is, a couple of days after receiving this piece of trash in the mail, you'd get a little card that said, "Hey, we're going to send you this thing. Check here and return this card if you don't want the tape." But that card always arrived in the mail days after the tape arrived. This was the pattern, and it would happen over and over for the next couple of years. Now, if you wanted to get out of Columbia House, all you had to do was cancel your subscription. Right. This is long before you could simply go to their website and click out a form and say, "I don't want this anymore." And there was never a phone number that you could call and say, "Stop sending me this trash." What you had to do is you had to write to them and ask for the form. They would send you the form in the mail. Then you had to fill out the form and return it in the mail. And then they would send you another tape that you didn't want, claiming that they never got the form or you filled the form out incorrectly. You could simply refuse to pay, hoping that they would go away, but normally what would wind up happening is they would send a collection agency after you. There were some folks that thought they were smarter than the system, and what they would do is they would use a friend's address. Send that dozen tapes to this address, and then they would nip by and ask their friend, "Hey, did a package arrive in the mail for me?" And then their friend would have to put up with the trash tapes showing up every month or so. Uh, it was a mess. If you had the time and the money, you could play tape roulette. Receive the tapes in the mail every month for an eternity, sending back the ones that you didn't want. This would wind up costing you a lot of postage. Maybe in 10 years, you might have purchased the required number of tapes, fulfilling your agreement, but it's going to cost. The initial contract seemed so nice the way it was worded. Yes, it was worded because they had a bunch of lawyers that wrote it out for them. How many people fell for the Columbia House scam? Just about everybody I know who was born in the 1900s fell flat on their face not just once, but maybe several times. First it was the 8 tracks, then it was the cassettes, then it was the CDs. And people kept just diving headfirst. Just a side note, people who aspire to become world famous musicians think that the road to heaven is the day they sign with some musical company. No, that road leads to the other place. Record companies make all the money on record sales. In order for the musical group to make any money, they have to perform live concerts all over the place. Plus, the record company owns not only the records, but sometimes the names of the musicians. Case in point, Prince. That was why he had to change his name. Personally, I don't believe he killed himself, accidentally taking the wrong medication, but that's just me. Those super huge, super rich companies could hire lawyers to write out contracts with just the right language so that nobody can understand what they're signing. Add to this that most musicians are so starstruck by the promises of would be fame and fortune, they don't bother to even try reading or understanding what they're signing. All they know is they're going to be rich and famous. Legal paperwork is designed to hand control over to whoever has the best lawyers. When I bought my first house back in 18, I'm not that old. When I bought my first house back in 1989, well, there are some people that would argue, uh, but that's just people that know me. I had an entirely new experience when I bought my first house back in 1989. It was confusing, and I had no idea what I was doing. And then it was such an ordeal. All I knew at that time was I was trying to get out of that horrible apartment I was living in. It was ridiculous. They had 12 units in only 11 parking spots. They never finished the apartment I was in. Just little things like that. You could hear the neighbors breathing through the walls. Well, the day I finally signed that agreement was weird. I walked into the room and there was a pile of papers on a table. I would say, just as a guesstimate, it was about 2 inches tall. My perception may have been a little skewed at the time, but that's what it looked like. There were two women there. One was the realtor that I'd been working with, and the other was the secretary for the firm. She told me that this was the contract I needed to sign. One sat to my right, one sat to my left. The realtor would hand me a form, tell me what the form said, and then show me where to sign. And then I would hand that form to the secretary who would put it in a file. I looked at these pieces of paper, and there was a whole bunch of writing on them. I saw the address of the place I was buying, and I saw my name. And I saw a whole bunch of words that I don't know what the heck they meant. And I signed where I was told. The woman to my left took the form and placed it in the file, and this went on for about 15 hours. Well, it seemed to go on for 15 hours. It probably only about 20 minutes. The funny thing is, the house payment was less than my apartment rent had been. For the next 15 years, I was agreeing to pay the bank a certain amount of money, for which they agreed to let me have this house. Not the one I'm sitting in now, but it was a nice house. I sat there as the realtor handed me papers, telling me where to sign, showing me where to sign. I would sign it and then pass it on to the secretary. I did not understand any of it because it was written in legalese. The party of the first part shall henceforth be known as the victim. That sort of thing. The realtor picked up one form and she held it, looking at it, looking at me, looking at it. Then she showed it to me, but she didn't set it down in front of me. She said, this form was me agreeing to pay the taxes on the money that the person selling the house was about to make. I would pay their taxes if they didn't pay them. And I looked at her like, huh? What kind of, is this some kind of a bad joke? Are you funning me? Somebody is about to make thousands of dollars because they're selling their house and then I'm going to pay their taxes for them? And she said yes. She said that this was an agreement that if the former owner did not pay their taxes, I would agree to pay them for them. And she said I should not sign it. I agreed. Why should I pay somebody else's taxes? It was some kind of an underhanded deal made between banks who worked both sides of the border. The former owner of the house I was buying lived in Monterey, and they sure the heck were not going to pay the taxes that they were about to benefit. If I had signed that form, it would have cost me a couple of $1,000 aside from my house payment. Had she not been a decent person, I would have found myself owing a lot of money for somebody else's benefit, simply because the house I was buying had been owned by a foreigner. By the end of my signing marathon, I had a blister on my little finger. I had a blister on my thumb. That is a Dire Straits reference. I had to wait for the paperwork to clear. I imagine somebody at the bank was quite upset when they found out that I had refused to sign that one form. It has been 37 years since I signed all those pages, and nobody has shown up yet demanding my kidney or my soul. I signed a lot of papers that I have no idea what I was signing. This is common among folks making huge purchases. I wonder how many folks had realtors that did not explain that form to them, and they wound up with an additional expense. April 21st, 1836, the Battle of San Jacinto was a pivotal moment in the Texas Revolution, leading to the independence of Texas. The Republic of Texas was formed. The battle took place, lasted 18 minutes. General Sam Houston and the Texans attacked General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna and the Mexican army at the San Jacinto battleground. Really, really close to where I was born. I was born in a little town called San Jacinto, which is right across the river from where the battle took place. It no longer exists. It was gobbled up by Houston. Well, they signed a treaty between Mexico and Texas. The treaty said that the border between Mexico and Texas was going to be the Rio Grande River. What the Texans did not know was that Mexico did not consider that great big river that runs past Laredo to be the Rio Grande. That was the Rio Bravo. The Rio Grande River was actually the Nueces River. This led to a territory known as the Disputed Territory between Texas and Mexico, where a lot of fighting took place. When the United States and Texas came to agreement that Texas was going to join 1846, the U.S. said that the Rio Grande was the southern border of the United States. Mexico said, nay, nay, it was the Nueces River. When neither side could come to an agreement, Mexico said that this was an act of war, and thus began the Mexican-American War. About 38,000 troops on both sides of the conflict were killed because of paperwork issues. Treaties are just pieces of paper with ink on them. Folks get all excited when somebody announces they've signed a treaty. March 22nd, 1621, leaders of the Plymouth colony and the Wampanoag people reached an agreement that would shape the early relationship between Indians, feather not dot, and the English settlers of New England. Following that first agreement, the federal government signed more than 350 agreements with Indians, and they violated every one of them. These treaties were supposed to be agreements between sovereign governments. They often promised peace, protection, supplies, reserved land where the tribes could live. These promises were all broken. As settlers moved west and new resources were discovered, treaty boundaries were moved. They were reduced, rewritten, or completely ignored. Land that had been guaranteed to the tribes for as long as the sun will shine and the wind. I forget how it goes exactly, but they got screwed in that one pretty bad. Andrew Jackson and Manifest Destiny pretty much annulled every treaty ever signed between the U.S. and the Indians. This has led to a lot of Indians who refuse to accept a $20 bill because Jackson's face is on them. They'll take two tens or they'll take four fives, but Old Hickory, you can keep him to yourself. We had a treaty which could be used to start fires, and that was about all it was worth. You roll it up and you rub two sticks together, and when it starts to burn, you stick it in the campfire. It's not just the US, it's every country on the planet. And Europe, from 1500 BC to 1860 AD, that's about 3,360 years, more than 8,000 treaties were signed with the intentions of making permanent peace. That's about 2.5 treaties per year. The average time that these treaties remained in force was about 2 years. There have been 14,600 wars in the area ever since that first treaty was signed. That's about 2.5 wars each year. Treaties are basically a Pangolesian pact. Pangalos was a fictional character in Voltaire's 1759 novel Candide. He was relentlessly optimistic character no matter how bad things were going. Panglo- Panglosian has become the mean. Panglosian has become a name for a naively optimistic person, no matter how bad things go. If you ever watched the TV show The Middle, Sue Heck is a good example of this. The Treaty of Versailles, signed June 28, 1919, officially ended World War I between Germany and the Allied powers. It imposed territorial losses, military restrictions, reparations, and the war guilt clause enacted against Germany. The thing is, Germany did not start World War I. It was Austria. In the 19th century, the major European powers maintained a tenuous balance of power known as the Concert of Europe. Treaties were signed by most of the countries saying that if anybody attacked them, these countries would have their back. Bismarck in Germany negotiated the League of the Three Emperors, which included Austria-Hungary, and basically that was one country, Russia, and Germany. The years before 1914 were marked by a series of crises in the Balkans as other powers sought to benefit as the Ottoman Empire slowly declined. Orthodox Russia considered itself the protectors of Serbia and other Slavic states. Austria viewed the Balkans as essential for the continued existence of their empire, and they saw Serbian expansion as a direct threat. Austria annexed the former Ottoman territories of Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Italian Turkish War led to the formation of the Balkan League, an alliance of Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece. June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, heir apparent to the throne, was shot while visiting Sarajevo, him and his wife both. If you study how the assassination took place, you would swear it was a setup. The car literally stopped right in front of the guy that was doing the shooting and then sat there. But that's another story. In fact, I'm pretty sure I did a show about it a while ago. Anyway, Austro-Hungarian authorities, they decided that this assassination was grounds for them to move into the country, and they began sending in troops. Austria, Hungary, Germany, Russia, France, and Britain had all sat down to discuss the situation, but when everything was said and done, everything was said and nothing was done. Austria told everybody that the Serbian intelligence had organized the Ferdinand murder. Austrian officials wanted to use this opportunity to start a war so they could invade a country. July 28th, Austria declared war on Serbia and they began shelling the country. Russia mobilized to support Serbia. Germany, who had a treaty with Austria and with Russia, they kind of sat there looking at what was going on because, well, both of their allies were fighting each other. Things began to get interesting. Germany knew that they could win if they did get into this conflict, and they wanted a piece of France. So they let Austria focus on Serbia, and they invaded France. France tried to kick them out of the country, but instead of leaving, the Germans dug in. Well, when the Germans dug in, the French dug in, and then the Germans dug some more. And the next thing you know, trench warfare was happening. Germany knew that they could win against France as long as the U.S. stayed out. Well, the U.S. was more than happy to stay out of this European conflict. Not our war, not our circus, not our flying monkeys. The sinking of the Lusitania, which happened May 7th, 1915, went unnoticed. Germany became worried that the U.S. just might decide to get into the war because they had treaties with Britain. Well, it said that if Britain was attacked, the U.S. would help. But Britain was not attacked. They had attacked Germany by supporting France. So pretty much the U.S. was not beholding to help out the Brits. Well, Germany was still worried that the U.S. just might get involved. And they came up with a cockamamie plan to keep the U.S. out of the war. Germany contacted Mexico and said that if Mexico would invade Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, then Germany would support them. Germany would supply them with tanks. They didn't have tanks yet. Germany would supply them with weapons, machine guns, bullets, advisors, things like that. The idea was that the U.S. would be so tied up trying to protect the southern border they wouldn't have time to worry about Europe. Germany sent word to Mexico by way of Ambassador Zimmerman. They used the telegraph system because that's how you did things. They also used an unbreakable code. The unbreakable code had already been broken by the British the year earlier. Britain knew what was supposed to be going down on the southern border of the U.S. They also didn't want Germany to know that they had broken that unbreakable code. Britain did contact President Wilson and they told him about the Zimmerman message, but they also told him to please don't let the Germans know that we know what they're saying. Wilson had to come up with a reason to declare war on Germany without mentioning the Zimmerman message. Well, the folks in the War Department got to digging around, and finally somebody said, hey, look, this ship was sunk May 7th, 1915, so let's declare war April 6th, 1917. That's 23 months after the fact. The combined weight of the French, British, Italian, Russian, and Japanese against the Austrian, German, Ottoman Empire, Kingdom of Bulgaria, and Romania were pretty much at a standstill until the U.S. got involved. On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, an armistice was declared. This could have been the end of the wars, or the war to end all wars, until somebody decided we need someone to pay for this mess. Austria was pretty much a broken country. They had been destroyed. They didn't have anything to pay with. They had barely survived the war. The U.S., Britain, and France decided it would be a good time to redraw the map of Europe and get even with somebody. But who? Who was still in fairly good shape? Who had an industry that could be used to rebuild the entire world? Now, Germany had come out of World War I in fairly good shape. The Allies decided to blame them for everything and make Germany pay for it. Well, the long and the short of this whole thing is the Versailles Treaty pretty much led directly into World War II. As the entire world was prancing about declaring peace on earth, people in Germany were preparing for the next big event. I'm going to call it good right there because I'm already at an hour and 7 minutes, and well, I still have a couple of pages to go, but enough of this signing things that you don't know what you're signing. Still today, treaties are being signed and people are cheering about them, and a paper with a zero power is being waved in the air as if this actually means something. I hope and I pray that someday when I take my last breath, I don't find myself trying to explain to old Scratch that when I signed that app agreement by putting an X in that little square, that I was not selling my soul to the devil. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell others they should be listening as well. If you think you might be willing to show up at an event in Georgia, let me know somehow. Comment on the bottom of the page or send me an email if you want. strangethings@arkanasa.com, and we'll get something bigger than somebody's garage. Till next time, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree? where they strung up a man, who they say he murdered 3. Strange things have happened there. No stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.